Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Drive Performance with these 4 disciplines for SEO teams, presented by Search Pilot and Search Engine Land. Before we begin, just a few viewing tips. If you have any audio issues, go ahead and click the audio icon on your screen to enable your audio settings. And if you have any viewing issues, you can use the Q&A section to communicate with us. You can also send questions and comments directly to the speaker about his presentation at any time. Joining us today is Craig Bradford, Chief Operating Officer at Search Pilot. Welcome, Craig. Thanks for joining us, and I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Cynthia. And yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining today. So before we get into it, if you don't know what Search Pilot is, I thought I'd just give you a very quick 2-second introduction to what we do. Search Pilot is an A/B testing platform for SEO teams. And so what we allow you to do is make a change to your website and then measure the impact of that change. So you would log into the Search Pilot interface, you would make a change to a group of pages, and then you would get a report which would look something like this. So it would show whether it's positive, negative, or inconclusive, and then you can decide whether you want to implement that test to the rest of the pages. So why am I here today talking about goals? Well, from a professional point of view, Search Pilot's whole mission is to prove the value of SEO for the world's biggest websites. And we do that by empowering them to make agile changes to their website and test the impact. And so this whole concept of being able to set goals and then make the changes and measure the impact and prove the value over time is perfectly aligned with Search Pilot's mission. But also personally, I just love having goals. Setting goals and setting strategies is something I've always been passionate about. And the data shows that I'm not the only one. Apparently, most people will enjoy their work more if they have goals, and actually companies will be more successful if they set goals. So hopefully, by sharing what I've learned over the years with you today, you'll enjoy the presentation and get a lot from it. So before I get into it, what I want to mention is that I have learned a lot of this stuff over the years from lots and lots of different sources. But in particular, I really recommend these 4 books. The first one is sort of a collection from Harvard Business Review on lots of different topics on strategy in general. The second one is High Output Management from Andy Grove, who is a sort of famous management book. Many of you will have heard of this one before. And then the last 2 are much more in the tactics level. So the 4 disciplines of execution, and then Measure What Matters. Measure What Matters is what sort of started the trend around OKRs, if anyone's ever looked into that. And so, any one of these books, I think, are a good place to start. I'm not affiliated with any of them. Nothing that I have to say today is representative of these companies, but I do recommend them. I think they're a great resource to anyone that's trying to set a strategy. So let's get into it. When I speak to different teams, I see 2 main problems with setting goals and setting strategies. The first one is knowing how to set good ones in the beginning. And then the second one is being able to execute on those goals. And by far, in my experience, being able to execute on the strategy is the hardest part. I see lots and lots of strategies around, corporate strategies, SEO strategies, and anyone can make a nice presentation, but then actually turning that into a project and a strategy that works seems to be the part where everyone struggles the most. And so before we dive into the actual how you do it, what I want to start off by is just getting a sense of how many people actually have set their goals this year already. We're coming into we're February now, we're coming up towards the start of a new financial year. And so this is normally the time when people are setting their goals. So if you just want to cast your vote in the poll and let me know if you've already set your company's SEO goals and if you know what they are. So we'll give that a few minutes. And then while you're doing that, at the same time, if you want to share your your actual goals, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. I won't share any details, but it'd be nice to see what types of goals people are actually setting. So it looks like 70+% of people have set a goal, which is fantastic, and around 30% haven't done it yet. Maybe they have plans. And in terms of the types of goals that people have, if we just want to move on back to the slides. Thank you. The types of things that I normally see from SEO teams are goals like these on the screen. So it'd be things like increasing organic traffic by a certain percent year over year, increasing share of voice, maybe trying to get into certain positions for keywords that are important to business, or by maybe generating a certain amount of additional revenue from organic traffic. And there's nothing wrong with these goals on their own. They're very, very typical, but the issue is that they're all lag metrics. And what I mean by that is if you set a goal in, say, March 2023, and then you want to try and achieve something by March 2024, there's this big gap in the middle. And I love this quote from Ed Rose Deming, who says, "You wouldn't drive a car by looking in the rear view mirror of a car." And I think that sort of tells a great story here. You know, what we are trying to do is achieve our goals, but we have to be able to track progress along the way. And the problem with goals like year-over-year growth or a certain amount of keywords is it's really hard to know whether you're making progress against them before you're actually there. And I love, this is a quote from James Clear from Atomic Habits, which I'm sure many people have read. And he says, your outcomes are a lagging measure of your habits, and your weight is a lagging measure of your eating habits. And I think that makes it's a really nice, clear example of what I'm trying to explain here, which is when people set goals to do things like lose weight, that's fine if that is what you want to achieve, but that's probably not what you should be measuring every single day. Because by the time you step on the scale, the things that can impact your weight have already passed, right? What you ate last week and how many times you went to the gym last week, those are all things that happened already, and so you now can't change it. And that's similar to looking at your rankings every day, or looking at your traffic every day, or looking at those things every month, is you can't change them by the time you're looking at them. And so that's the problem with lag metrics. And so today, I'm going to run through 4 different areas that I hope can help make this a bit easier for you. Starting off, we're going to look at how do you pick the right goals. We're then going to go on to how do you create and measure lead metrics as opposed to just looking at lag metrics. We're going to look at how you can measure progress along the way. And then lastly, we're going to finish by talking about ways that you can increase your chance of being successful if you do the previous 3 correctly. So, first section, how do you pick the right goals? Now, I could do a whole presentation on just this one area. And in actual fact, I have done in the past. I recommend reading this post on Moz called Digital Strategy Basics, the What, the Why, and the How. I actually wrote this many years ago now, but all of it is still very, very relevant. And the reason I've mentioned today is the key part of any strategy and the key part of setting any goals is to have extreme focus on what you're trying to achieve. And that's going to be a theme of today. This is a quote from one of those books I mentioned, from Andy Grove, who says, the art in management lies in the capacity to select from the many activities of seemingly comparable significance, the 1 or 2 or 3 that provide leverage well beyond the others and concentrate on them. And this is exactly what we're talking about. Not trying to do everything at the same time. Instead, really decide on what is most important and focus on those few things with extreme passion. And so one of the ways that you can decide on what goals you want to set is by asking yourself this question. If every other area of your operation remained at its current level of performance, what's the one area where change would have the greatest impact? And so if you think about that for a second, there's lots and lots of things that your company could be doing, and there's lots of things that you might be tempted to implement. But the most important thing you can do is try to be very, very strict and think about this question to narrow it down. And so naturally, this will generate lots of ideas. Maybe you think it's to do with organic traffic increases. Maybe you want to get unique content on all your product pages. Maybe you want to double the number of buying guides on your website if you're a retail website. Or it could be things like trying to reduce the amount of time it takes you to make changes. Maybe you've got really long dev queues at the moment, and you think if we could get that down to less than a week to make changes, that would make the biggest impact to our business. Or it could be things like number of link and root domains, increasing your click-through rate. I saw a few people in the Q&A saying that increasing click-through rate was one of their goals. And so again, these are all great goals, but they are all lag metrics. Now, the nice thing is you don't have to make all of the decisions, right? If you work in a team, that team probably reports to another team, and all parts of the company ideally will have their own goals. But what you should be trying to do is set goals that align with the level above you. Now, the reason why this is a good thing is it reduces some of the choice. It reduces some of the number of things that you could do. Because if the team above you, maybe you are down here under this sub-team goal, and you're reporting to the head of digital, and the head of digital is reporting to the head of marketing, all of those people are going to have their sub-goals. And if the person above you has set a goal already, then you obviously want to try and set something that aligns to that person's goal as well. And so using those constraints can actually be a nice thing, because it not only helps alignment in the company, but it also helps you to reduce the number of decisions you have to make. Now, a warning that you will want to do many things at this point. As I said, you're going to generate lots and lots of ideas. And because you've asked yourself that question, what are the most important things that we could do to move the needle? Chances are you've probably come up with a bunch of good ideas. And that's a good thing, right? We want to come up with lots of good ideas, but you have to aggressively try to narrow that down to just the one or two things that will make the biggest difference. So there are three temptations and three reasons why narrowing this down can actually be more difficult than it sounds. The first one is this idea of the paradox of choice, which there's actually a book written, and that's the title of the book, The Paradox of Choice. I've not actually read the book, but I've seen the TED Talk. And the theory is essentially that choice and freedom of choice should be a good thing. It should make you happy. But too much choice can actually cause stress. And one of the funny examples that the author gives in the book is that when he went into his local supermarket, there were over 100 different types of salad dressing to choose from. And so we live in this world where there are an abundance of things to choose from every single day. And that's just one category, right? If you walk down different aisles, you will see the same range of selection for lots of different things in the supermarket. And so actually having too much choice can give you stress, and it can make those decisions more difficult than they need to be. And that's why I mentioned having those constraints of the teams above you can actually be a good thing, because it reduces the amount of choice that you have. The second one is fear of regret. And what I mean by that is when you are lining up all these things that you could potentially do, the temptation will be to compare them to each other and worry that if you do one and not the other, what if it's not successful? And the sort of analogy that I compare this to is like a race. When people are in a race and they all cross the finish line at the end, they can literally see that they were 2 seconds behind someone or a second ahead of them. And so you can, I guess, have fear of regret in terms of your training schedule. And you can say, if I'd just done that one thing, maybe I would have made up that extra second. But that's not what's going to happen here. We're not going to get to the end of the financial year and see what everybody else did and find out whether we were 2 seconds ahead or 2 seconds behind. And so get that out of your head. Don't worry that you are going to be comparing and have that sort of fear of regret at the end, because you can't do it even if you wanted to. And then the final one is this fear of commitment. And the thing to remember here is you don't have to stick with the decision you make. One of the things we'll learn today is that you want to learn early if something isn't working. And so remember that executing on your strategy doesn't mean sticking to the plan. You should be willing to change your strategy as you go along. If your lead metrics aren't resulting in the lag metric moving, then you probably do want to change your strategy. But to begin with, you want to be really committed to the one that you decide to go for, and then only change if necessary. A little tip that I recommend is to keep a decision log, and this will be handy later on, because when you write down this goal that you're going to go for, it's really nice to have a record when you're not stressed, when you're not emotional, when you're not having to deal with the day-to-day fires that will inevitably come up in your day-to-day job, why you have decided to pick this particular goal over everything else, what will happen if you deviate from the plan, why you've decided to do this over the other ones that you might have made a short list of. And this will be really, really handy at a later date when things come up and you'll be tempted to put this goal to the sideline, and you'll justify it in a bunch of ways that will make sense at the time and will be very tempting at the time to say, well, I know I set that goal, but right now I have to deal with this thing. And that's when it's really nice to be able to look back at your decision log and say, I wrote about this 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and I said, when X happens, remember that you shouldn't deviate from this plan because it's really important to the company for X, Y, and Z reasons. So yeah, highly recommend doing that. And so once you've got your goals, one of the crucial steps is to change the way that you phrase them. And rather than have something like, we want to increase our click-through rate or double the number of buying guides that we have, you should try and phrase all your goals in the format from X to Y by date. And the reason why this is really important, the from X to Y part is probably obvious. It makes it very, very concrete. But actually the date is the most important one, because it's really easy to make excuses and say, well, we increased the number of buying guides from 200 to 250, but we can do that by December. And by setting the date, it adds constraints around the problem. It means you'll act differently depending on the time frame. If you have to do something by September, you will have a different strategy than if you have to do something by December. And so it's really important to sort of time box that, because at some point you have to be able to say, okay, we finished this stretch of a goal. We either managed it or we didn't manage it, and we now want to change strategy and try something else. And so when you set these goals, always remember that. Don't just set a sort of a generic goal. Make sure you phrase it in the format from X to Y by date. Okay, so that's the picking the goal part of the presentation. Next is onto the lead metrics. And this is probably the most important part, and it'll be I would imagine the biggest change to how you might be setting goals right now. So the way that I like to think about this is lead metrics are like placing bets. You're essentially saying that we bet that if we do X, we will achieve our goal. And that's the lag metric we're talking about. And excuse me, if you've ever done OKRs, one of the Measure What Matters book that I mentioned earlier on, OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. And the way that sort of framework talks about setting objectives is you have your goal, which is the objective, and then you have key results underneath it, which are the equivalent of lead metrics. That's what we're going to be talking about here. And they say that it should be necessary and sufficient. All the key results should be necessary and sufficient to achieve your objective. Now, what that means on the necessary side is if you have, say, 5 key results or 5 lead metrics, if you were to go through all of those and it's possible to hit your objective without doing every single one of those, then you should just remove any that aren't necessary. because you want to focus, you want to pick the lowest number of battles, the lowest number of effort that you can to achieve the results. So it doesn't make sense to do 5 things if you only need to do 3. On the sufficient side, it's sort of a little bit different. What it's saying is if you achieve all of your 5 results and you still don't achieve your objective, then you've picked bad key results. You should change your key results so that if you manage to hit all of these key results, it should be inevitable that you hit the objective. And so you should modify it or take some out and swap in other ones so that that's true. I don't fully agree with the sufficient version. I agree with the necessary part. I think it's a great idea to, again, the theme being focus. If you don't have to do 5 things, don't do 5 things. Pick the lowest number of battles that you can to win the war. But on the sufficient side of things, I think, and I've used OKRs, I've used them at Distilled, I've used them at Search Pilot. The thing I don't like about this is I think it really it makes the process of setting your key results or your lead metrics much, much harder, because there's no leap of faith. You have to have these key results that if you achieve them, the objective will inevitably happen. And I have to say, even in the book itself, when you look at some of the examples, I'm not convinced that that's even true. So my advice would be, don't worry so much about the sufficient. Instead, when you set lead metrics, you want to make sure that they are predictive of achieving the goal. So it doesn't have to be guaranteed, but you have to believe that if you did well at this thing, there's a good chance it will impact the lag metric. And it can be influenced by the team members. And that's really, really important, because there's nothing worse than trying to work really hard and do a bunch of work only to find out that you can't actually move the needle, or what you're trying to do is being held up by someone else that you don't have any say in their workload or what things they decide to do. So when you're setting lead metrics, these are the 2 key things to bear in mind. And there are 2 different kinds of lead measures. The first one is outcomes, which are essentially mini lag metrics. And what I mean by that is the team is accountable for the outcome of the goal, or the outcome of this mini lag metric, but not necessarily how to achieve it. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples in a second. On the other side, we have actions, and these are almost the exact opposite. This time it's very prescribed. The team is accountable for doing the thing rather than the result. So and it's okay if you change course. So examples of both would be on the outcome example, you might decide to set a goal of never having a week below 250,000 organic sessions to the buyer's guide section of your website. Now, the reason why that's an outcome-based objective, or lead metric, I should say, is there's loads of different ways that you can do that, right? We're not going to prescribe the way that you do it. The team can decide how to do that on their own, but they will be held accountable to the outcome. Another one might be something like limiting the number of people that see a 404 page to 500 or fewer every week. Again, you can go about doing that however you want, but it doesn't change the fact that you'll be responsible for making sure that you don't go above that level. And then the last one might be a goal of increasing non-branded impressions from X to Y. Again, you can decide how you want to do that, but the goal is very clear. We want to get our traffic above a certain level. The other type is the actions, and this is very clear. The goal here would be to set a behavior that you do every single week. So it might be to refresh buyer's guides every week. It might be to launch one new SEO test every week. It might be to run a crawl and fix 10 internal broken links every week. The point is, it's prescribed what you're going to do. The activity is what you're going to do. It's about putting in the reps rather than trying to be creative. Whereas outcomes leave room to be creative and solve the problem however you want, but you're going to be measured against that outcome. So I mentioned this briefly on one of the previous slides, but you have to be beware of dependencies. So what I mean by that is, imagine you are working to set your goal, and you decide that what you want to do is really focus on getting your SEO tickets deployed to production as quickly as you can. And so you set yourself a goal like deploy 2 new SEO tickets every single week. The problem with that is unless you're an engineer, you can't change that, right? You can beg, borrow, and steal, but you can't influence whether or not that actually goes into production because you don't have the authority or the means to do that. You need an engineer. And so instead of doing that, what I recommend is focus on what you can control. So for instance, in this example, I would go to someone on the engineering side and say, right, I'm going to set myself a goal to get as many tickets deployed as I can. What do you think I could do to increase the chance of that happening? And then you might find that they say things like, well, we need the specification document needs to be filled out. There has to be a Jira ticket with a tag SEO. The change needs to have a business case attached to it, and it needs sign off from the product manager, right? So maybe it's things like that. Great. So now you know what can influence the likelihood of your changes getting deployed. You can focus on these activities as opposed to focusing on setting goals around deploying tickets that you don't have control over. And a bit of a fun game that we like to do at Search Pilot is to turn this into a game of bingo. So you'll see here that I've essentially made all of those steps into columns. So you can see I've got a column for the spec is complete, a column for the Jira ticket being done, etc. And then on the left-hand side, we have the ticket, whether it's maybe getting FAQ markup onto product pages, fixing soft 404s, whatever the ticket is, that's on the left. So now you can set yourself goals of getting a certain number of bingo tickets as opposed to a certain number of changes published. And so every week you can work on your Jira tickets, you can work on finalizing specification documents, you can work on business cases, and all of this work is working towards the theory that it's going to influence the amount of tickets that are going to ultimately end up pushed into production. And I think this is, a great way to influence this. If you get to the end of, say, a quarter and still none of your SEO tickets have been done, that is back to the point on action-based lead metrics. That's not really your fault, right? You came up with a theory. You thought that this thing would influence the chances of getting those things pushed to production. But as I said earlier on, execution doesn't mean sticking to the plan. At that point, you take this to the engineer and say, right, I tried this for a quarter. I still didn't get as many tickets done as I thought I would do. Why do you think that was? What else do I need to be doing? And you can change the plan and try and set another goal. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, one thing you might have noticed, and that you'll probably come up against a lot, is that sometimes the data that you need isn't available. It might not be that the information you need is already in a Google Analytics report or it's already in your CRM. Sometimes you have to do a bunch of work to go and get the data that you need. And that is fine. That is part of the process, and it's actually very, very useful and valuable to the company. But just be aware that, the information you need to track lead metrics may not always be there, and that's fine. So when you're trying to come up with good lead indicators, these are some questions that I find can be useful to think about. So try and have a think about what have you done before that could make a difference to this goal. Or what positive indicators have you seen before? Maybe you tried something 6 months ago, you saw that it was making some progress, and then you got busy with something else. That happens quite a lot. Does your team have any particular strengths that are useful for this particular goal? Or on the flip side, does your team have any weaknesses that might stop you from achieving the goal? What are your unfair advantages? And then lastly, what do our best people do differently? Now, you can add a bunch of other questions to this. These are just a few that I find can be quite helpful. And normally from this, it will, again, generate a bunch of good lead metric ideas. Again, remember to focus at this point, because just like when we set the goal, the lead metrics are hopefully going to generate a lot of good ideas as well. But it's important to remember that you can't do them all as much as you would like to. Okay, so now I want to run through a real example of how we might do this. A few months ago, I ran a webinar on SEO testing for retail websites. And if you would like to see the replay, you can scan the QR code at the bottom left there, or go to the Search Pilot website and you can find the replay of this. Essentially, I came up with 30 different SEO test ideas for retail websites based on Home Depot versus Lowe's. And when I was doing that, one of the things that I noticed was the buying guide section of both of these websites generated a ton of traffic. So Lowe's have about 340 buyer's guides, and it generates about 1 million organic sessions per month. Home Depot has roughly double that, right? So when I looked at this, I thought, well, great, keep doing that, keep generating more buying guides. It seems to be working for Lowe's. That's definitely something that I would invest in. So that was a few months ago. But then when I was looking at this the other day in preparation for this webinar, I noticed that something has changed. Although Lowe's have built a lot more buying guides, so they're up to about 400 at this point. You can see the purple line is the number of pages, but the pink line is the amount of traffic that these pages are generating. And yeah, it's really surprising that you can see that during this period, the traffic to these pages have decreased quite substantially. In fact, during the last 2 years, Lowe's have increased the number of buying guides by 70%, but the organic traffic to those pages have actually decreased by 60%. So this is fascinating. I don't know anything about this situation. I also didn't spend too much time looking into it, so there could be a very obvious answer for this. Maybe they redirected that traffic somewhere else. So if you know, I'd love to drop me an email and tell me. But it's fine for the purposes of this webinar, and I think it would actually make a great goal. So if I was working in-house with Lowe's, a really nice goal to shoot for would be something like this. We want to go from minus 60% year-over-year growth to break even by the end of 2023. Now, I'll be the first to admit this is not a very motivating goal. Setting a goal to get back to break even is a bit, no one wants to be setting goals like that. However, it's a ton of traffic to make up. 60% by the end of 2023 is about 6% per month. So it's a lot of work. And so something like this is very, very hard to do. So if that's the goal, we now need to come up with lead metrics, because that's a lag metric. We're not going to be able to track progress against that along the way. So again, I'm going to go through these questions and say, well, what have we never done before that could make all the difference? Are there any strengths that our team has in particular, et cetera, and that's going to hopefully try and generate a bunch of ideas. In my position as someone who works at Search Pilot, the things that would jump out to me are these three. So in terms of positive indicators I've seen work before, that immediately makes me think of updating content. In lots of tests that we've done, we've seen that refreshing content can often result in more organic traffic. And so that's something that immediately jumps out to me that we could do. And then the other two just scream SEO testing to me. Because as I mentioned, I have no idea why this traffic has decreased. They could have deleted a bunch of internal links. They could have had, it could be a Google update. It could be something that they've broken on the website. There's tons of reasons why this could be. But what I do know is that we can get to the bottom of it by running lots of tests and trying to figure out through iteration what changes we can make to increase that traffic. So when you're setting these goals, a sort of a word of warning is I find that timelines of 3 to 6 months work best. So although the goal that I set was an objective to get to the end of the year, I probably wouldn't set lead metrics that are 10, 11, 12 months away. I find that the sweet spot is between 3 to 6 months. Any less than 3 months and it's too short of a period to really make an impact. Any more than 6 months, and you can find that you can't move the needle. You can't get that feedback loop of making a change and seeing the lead indicators moving because it's just taking too long. So I would recommend setting goals of sort of 3 to 6 months time periods. I'm sure lots of people will have heard this quote. I actually couldn't find who originally said it. I think it might be Bill Gates, but the internet doesn't seem to agree on it. It says, most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. In our scenario, the way I think this translates is most people overestimate what they can get done in a quarter and they underestimate what they can get done in a year. And so that's why I quite like having that mix of setting maybe quarterly lead metrics where we're looking to influence something over 6 months plus for the lag metric. All right, so looking at that goal, we've got the lag metric, which is going from minus 60% to break even by the end of 2023. Below that, we're then going to set some lead metrics. So in this instance, using the questions that I just went through, the two that I decided to set were around refreshing the content and running lots of tests. So in this instance, I'm going to set one which is to refresh 50 buying guides by September 2023. My thinking there was set a goal of updating 100 in a year, so 50 over 6 months. And then on the testing, I think a testing cadence of 5 tests a month is about the most you could do with a site like Lowe's when they have 400 or so buying guides in that section. So that's the lag metric. This is the lead metric, and we've gone through the checklist of making sure that the goal is phrased in a from X to Y by date format. We've got lead metrics that can be influenced by the team, and we have lead metrics that we believe are predictive of success. Now, obviously, there's a leap of faith in there. There's a leap of faith that updating buying guides will increase traffic, but that's why we track it along the way. What you're hoping to see is the lead metric goes up, and then there's a slight delay, and then the lag metric starts to move as well. And I'll show you that in a second. So does that mean we're done? We've set the goal. We've got some lead metrics. Surely, is that it? We've got a strategy. Well, if you're anything like me, you've probably seen that this is exactly the bit where a lot of strategies go wrong. People set the goals, but like I said, being able to actually execute on those goals and achieve the strategies that you set out is much harder than that. So the third section I want to talk about is how do you measure that progress, because this is the part which is going to give us that feedback loop. It's going to encourage us to keep going. So dashboards really matter when it comes to this stuff. The image in the background here is actually from Geckoboard, which is a company, I believe they're based in the UK, but they do exactly what you're seeing there. They make these really nicely presented data visualizations about key business metrics. And when I worked at Distilled, I actually used to have one of these up in the office on a big TV, and it was really great. But we are not in an office anymore. Post COVID, many teams will be working remote now. And to be honest, you don't need something as fancy as this. It's actually there's too many metrics on this particular dashboard for what we're trying to achieve. We only want to have 2 or 3 at any given time. But the reason that dashboards are important is they are a reminder to the rest of the company what is important. What is the thing that we are working on that we have decided ahead of time in an unemotional state is the most important thing to the company. it's also a reminder to yourself about what work is important, because as I said, things will come up. The day-to-day work will come up and you will get busy. And so it's nice to have something that you can look at and have a constant reminder of the work that you're doing is important. And it's also a great tool for answering the question, are we winning? Ultimately, that is what we're trying to see. Are these things that we are doing making a difference? Is the work that you're doing week to week, month to month, making an impact on that lag metric and the goal that we're trying to achieve? So you need some kind of dashboard like this. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can just be a Google Doc. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples in a second. So this is an example of those two lead metrics that I just mentioned. So you can see the one on the left here is the buying guide example. And I've filled this in with obviously made up data. You'll see it goes to August 2023. I don't have a time machine. This is just made up data as if we were starting a new financial year in April. And so what you would do is you would say, okay, I want to try and refresh 50 guides by September, and then make a target for what that means per month, per week. It means you can track progress against that, and you can see whether you're above or below the target. So this is actually a fairly typical progress chart that you'll see. Normally, when you set a new goal or a new lead metric, it's normal to have this sort of dip, because in this particular example, you have to do things like make a list of the pages you want to update. You have to write the content. You have to brief designers and content writers. There's a bunch of work to do up front before you can actually start publishing and updating that content. And so you see that started off a bit slow. We fell below target, and then around about June time, we got back on track, and then hopefully you get back above target by August, and you achieve the goal on time. So that's an example of sort of an outcome-based lead metric. The other one is an example of an action-based lead metric. So this time we are saying launch 5 tests every single month. And you can see that we've just got a simple test target line on that chart. And then the pink line is how many tests we're doing every single month. One thing is, in the book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution, they talk about having this done weekly. For testing, that wouldn't work very well, because tests typically take 3-4 weeks to run. I disagree with that. I think it's fine to run, to have some lead metrics that might be a bit longer than a week, as long as you are having your weekly check-ins and your weekly stand-ups with your team, which I'm going to come on to in a second. So this is the lead metrics charts. And then this is how we would measure progress against the lag metric. And again, I've just made this up with data, but you can see that we started this in March, where we're down 60% year over year. And if those lead metrics are effective, what you'd expect to see is something like this, where you start off at minus 60%, and that gradually reduces over time until the point where you eventually cross the target threshold, and hopefully even grow beyond that target. Now, if you got to say July or August, and actually there's still no difference to the lag metric, that might be a sign that you should change your lead metrics, because you've had 5, maybe 6 months of updating content, running experiments, and for whatever reason, you've still not managed to reduce that year-over-year growth from minus 60 to even to any less. So if you're not seeing that work, you'd go back to the drawing board. You consider changing your lead metrics to see whether or not you have to revisit your plan. And so when you put all that together, this is what you should be looking at every single week. You should be checking your dashboards. These should be visible to you and your team, and you should be tracking progress against them. Now, it's worth mentioning, I'm only talking about this through the lens of one team. In reality, you should be doing this through the whole organization. Now, it depends on where you sit within the organization. I'm sure we have a mix of people who are individual contributors and people that are maybe very senior in companies who will be setting the overall organization goals. But if you are setting this at an organization level, this would cascade down to teams. So maybe the company would have, say, a revenue goal that might break down into marketing goals, product goals, engineering goals, and every single one of those teams would have their own version of these dashboards and their own version of the goals. All right, so last section is how do you increase your chances of success once you've done all of these things. Now, just a quick note, if there are any questions, there'll be time at the end for Q&A, so feel free to drop in questions as you think of them, and if we have time at the end, we'll try and answer as many of them as we can. So, the first tip on how to increase your chance, I sort of alluded to it earlier, but it is to meet every single week with your team to talk about these goals. And don't forget that this has been decided as being the most important thing to the company and to your team. And so it's really, really important that you are putting in the reps, that you're putting in the work, that you're showing up every single week, and that people aren't just setting these and then forgetting them. That is one thing I will say about OKRs. So as I said, we've tried OKRs before. We currently use the 4 disciplines of execution. And what I found with OKRs was that people would set the goals and then they'd get busy with other things, even though people were told to, check in and have updates. They didn't do it with enough consistency that often weeks would go past, sometimes even months would go past, and then people would remember, oh yeah, I set those goals 2 months ago, and it's almost the end of the quarter. If there's one thing that will dramatically increase your chance of success, it is this one. It's having the meeting every single week where your team talk about the goals and what is important. And you should essentially be asking yourself every single week, what can I do this week to impact the lead metrics? So if you're on the SEO team, we have these 2 lead metrics, one to update content and one to run tests. The question you should be asking every week is, okay, what can I work on that's going to help move those lead metrics the most? And this is what it would look like. So once you come up with those commitments, you should log them and keep them in a spreadsheet where you write down who is doing what every single week. So in this instance, I've got that I will be emailing 5 new test ideas to Matt. Imelda is going to send a list of the next 10 guides to be updated to Sally. Emily is going to publish a structured data test on guides. And Will is going to complete QA on test idea 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you do this, it's very, very clear what everyone should be working on that week. And then when you have the meeting, it should be a very short and focused meeting where all you're essentially covering is, last week I said I would do X and I did or didn't achieve that thing. This week I will do Y. And words really matter when you do these commitments. Avoid doing commitments like work on, research, look into, because it's really easy to get to the end of the week and not know whether or not you did it. If I have a commitment to work on a blog post, if I just open up a Word document, put a header in it, and then don't write any words, have I worked on my commitment that week? If I worked on the blog post, probably. I could probably tick it off, but I don't think it's certainly not going to make any progress towards the company in a meaningful way. So instead, you want to try and start them off with a verb. You want to use phrases like publish, email, send, because then it's very, very clear when you get to the end of the week whether or not you achieved your goal. And then when you're doing all of this, it's really, really important you build a culture of trust. And what I mean by that is trust that everyone is going to do their commitment that week. There is nothing that will make this more fleeting and unlikely to be successful than if you're having these weekly meetings and everyone turns up and says, oh yeah, I meant to publish that blog post, but I got busy with this other thing. That just says no one's taking it seriously. It's going to motivate the team. It's going to demotivate the best people on the team who are taking it seriously. And if you're a leader that's running that organization or running that team, it doesn't say very much about you if you then accept that type of commitment when we've all agreed that this is the most important thing in the company. So what I would recommend is that you try and keep up that cadence of every single person ticking off those boxes. This can be hard if you're used to the OKR system of scoring, because with OKRs, it is seen as being 70% is considered a win. That's not the case here. What we're trying to do is move to a culture of no matter what, I will get this commitment done. I will get my goal done that I said I was going to achieve. And track the success rate. So some people are motivated by different things. Personally, I love scoreboards like this where I can see how I'm performing against my peers. And it's really nice to see, are we all hitting 100%? Is there anyone who's really not doing well, and should we be chatting through those people separately? So to summarize, we want to set a goal. We want to focus and set a goal of the phrase from X to Y by date. We want to set lead measures by placing bets on activities that we believe will help achieve the goal. Dashboards really matter for this stuff. So we want to track progress towards goals and achievements. And then we want to be running these weekly stand-ups. So we want to run weekly meetings where we review the scoreboard and we all say what we did last week and what you're going to do the week after. So before we finish, I wanted to show a couple more worked examples of scenarios to make this really concrete. This is a made-up example of one that maybe be suitable for a technical SEO team, where the scenario is they're having problems with indexation of the PDP pages. So maybe only 30% of the products are getting crawled. So the goal would be to find ways to decrease the amount of time that Google is spending on low-value pages. And so we might set a lag metric that is we want to go from 30% to 90% of PDP pages being crawled monthly by August 2023. And then below that, we might set lead metrics like go from 60 to 95% of response codes being 200 by July. So the idea there being if Google's spending a bunch of time on 404s and 302s and 301s, they're not spending time on your actual pages. And then the other lead metric would be to go from X to Y crawled but not indexed pages. So that would be if Google's spending a bunch of time on pages that are have parameters on them and have canonicals on them that actually don't need to be crawled, then you might want to try blocking those in robots.txt, for instance. This one is for a testing team. So imagine the goal is that you have to increase your organic traffic without resources to create more content. So the goal for that might be to increase click-through rate to the pages you already have. In this instance, we're going to set a lag metric, which is to go from X to Y average click-through rates on the PLP pages by July. And at the same time, we're going to set these lead metrics to run a certain number of tests. We're going to run 30 title tag tests by July, and we're going to run 30 meta description tests by July. And those would work really well to track against. And then the last one is an agency. So imagine you've got a client that wants to increase the number of link and root domains to the content that they already have. You might set a goal, which is to recover the links that they already have at the same time as trying to build more links from to existing content. So the lag metric in this instance would be go from X to Y link and root domains by December. And then you might set some lead metrics around recover X number of broken links by a certain date. And the second lead metric would be to outreach existing content to X publications every week. And so the idea would be to try to do both of these things at the same time. And yeah, hopefully that has an impact on the overall number of link and root domains. And that's it. Hopefully that'll made sense, and we covered quite a lot in 55 minutes. If there are any questions, I'd love to answer a couple if we have time.
Thanks, Craig. We do have some time, and I'll go right ahead while you take your sip of water and read the first question from Christina, who says she's the only one that works on SEO, and she manages approximately 40 websites. What's the best way to manage this quantity of websites until I can expand the SEO team, hoping to by mid 2024, she says. What are the top 3 items she should focus on?
Well, firstly, wow, what a hard job you've got, Christina, working on 40 different websites. But actually, that is perfect for this scenario because the answer is you can't do them all. That's a perfect scenario of where focus is very, very important. If I was you, I would try to prove the case on even just one website. Pick the one that's most strategically important to the company, try and make an impact on that, but then use that for the business case. I can imagine the charts that you could make to say, hey, manager, I'm going to set a goal this year. The objective is to do this thing. I'm going to track these lead metrics. And if I achieve that, that's my pitch to hire into the team. And hopefully that'll be a compelling case to allow you to hire in and actually get a lot of confidence from the management team as well. So yeah, I think that could work quite nicely.
Great. Thanks, Craig. We have a question from Rich. How do you recommend adjusting goals based on drastically changing consumer behavior? Using Lowe's or Home Depot as an example, has the pandemic era DIY trend fallen off, which could significantly impact the how-tos and buying guides?
Yeah, good question. I mean, particularly in SEO, we're always going to have to deal with changing trends in some ways, whether that is user behavior, Google updates, pandemic. There's always going to be something. I think, as I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, I think the core thing you always have to do is focus on what you can control, right? We want to focus on things that you can influence and that are predictive of success. So if it is something like the buying guide that you've said, you know what, that is what it is, we can't particularly change that, that's fine. But ultimately, what we're always doing, step one in this process, is deciding what to focus on. What is the thing that you can do that's going to move the needle the most for your organization, and focusing on that. It really is as simple as just trying to really hone in on the thing that is going to move the needle the most.
Perfect. Thanks, Nicholas. I'm sorry. Thanks, Craig. We have a question from Nicholas. Easy to get the names messed up when you're reading so many questions that have come in. So Nicholas is asking about Search Pilot. How can your platform and strategy help connect individual tests to broader strategy goals?
So exactly like this. I think there's SEO has always been very, very hard. And it is getting harder. Back when I used to work in Distilled, you try to give the best recommendations you can to your clients, but ultimately you get no way of proving whether or not it was positive. You make a change, you go and look at your rankings, you go and look at your organic traffic, and you hope it goes up, but sometimes it doesn't, and you've got no way of knowing whether or not that thing you did increase traffic or not. So the way the Search Pilot works is to try and remove that doubt. We run an experiment during a controlled period of time where we don't impact a statistically similar bucket of pages. And so we then know if your traffic increases to the varying pages, that the change you made was actually positive. And so from our testing, we've actually found that only about 20% of the changes you make are actually positive. About the same percentage is negative, and then the rest are inconclusive. So about 80% of the tickets you're working on probably aren't doing anything to your website. And so that's where we come in. The whole point is to try and just focus on the ones which are positive, and then also at the same time avoid the ones that you might accidentally roll out, which are negative.
Okay, Craig, thank you so much for your engaging presentation. It looks like we are out of time. So to our attendees, if we didn't get to your question, we will be sure to pass it along to Search Pilot. On behalf of Search Engine Land, I want to thank everyone in our audience for attending today's webinar, and we hope you join us again soon. Take care.
Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks, everyone.